I call Eugenia Sage.
Speaker, thank you. As a Christchurch-based MP, I'm pleased to take a short call on the Antarctica Environmental Protection Liability Annex Amendment Bill. Christchurch has very strong associations with Antarctica. It's been the gateway to Antarctic exploration from the very early days. It's the headquarters for Antarctic New Zealand, and there are a number of fascinating exhibits and artefacts from Antarctic exploration at the Canterbury Museum. And of course, vessels bound for Antarctica will often replenish their supplies in the port of Lyttelton, and the aircraft leave from Harewood. So, Mr. Speaker, as others have noted, the Antarctic Treaty signed in 1959, with its focus on the use of Antarctica for peaceful purposes, is a model for international cooperation. The continent is the world's largest wilderness area, and there's certainly an international expectation that the highest standards of environmental performance should apply to all who operate there. So that's why in 1991 in Madrid, the treaty partners agreed to append a protocol on environmental protection to the Antarctic Treaty to establish a protection regime for the continent. And this agreement in 1991 included a commitment to negotiate and agree on procedures and rules for liability for any environmental damage. And that was eventually negotiated and agreed in Stockholm in 2005. So this bill includes a new Part 5A in the Principal Act, which sets out the legal liability for damage to the Antarctic environment, and it implements New Zealand's obligations under Annex 6 to the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the treaty. And it deals specifically with liability arising from environmental emergencies. And because it applies just to emergencies, rather than establishing a comprehensive regime for environmental damage, it was not as broad as environmental groups were urging the partners to adopt. But it will be a significant improvement on the current rules for managing Antarctica. And New Zealand chaired the negotiations in Stockholm, which resulted in the liability annex. So when the bill was introduced in 2009, New Zealand was expected to be one of the first countries to formally approve the annex by adopting it into domestic law. So we share with Labor the concerns about the delay, but we still support the bill and will be pleased when it's passed. And the effects of the bill, as others have noted, will be that New Zealand operators, such as tourism operators who discover or who cause an environmental emergency, such as an oil spill, must immediately notify the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and then respond promptly and effectively. The bill sets out a regime for offences and a mechanism to recover costs if the operator fails to act, and as the Minister noted, it does cap liability for various incidents. There were only 4 submissions on the bill, and the Environment and Conservation Organisations of New Zealand sought that it be extended to cover all vessels leaving New Zealand, including fishing vessels. And that would have been logical given the number of marine incidents we've seen in recent years, which have raised the need for a comprehensive liability regime. That includes, of course, the Nishin Maru, which was a whale processing ship in the Ross Sea, where an explosion caused loss of life and power in 2007. But officials' view was that, and the Select Committee's view, was that there was no agreement between the treaty partners on the issue of having a comprehensive liability regime, including fishing vessels, during the Annex negotiations, so it couldn't proceed. And Mr. Speaker, that highlights a major problem with the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations which are occurring this week in New Zealand. Because as with those negotiations, if there are any changes to domestic law, there's the potential that if those changes haven't been agreed by the state parties negotiating in Auckland, then there won't be an ability to amend domestic law to provide for that. So in this bill, there's a lot of support for it. It's been done with a lot of transparency, but bills like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and their potential to override domestic law are a major problem. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will please say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it.
Antarctica Environmental Protection Liability Annex Amendment Bill, second reading.
This bill is set down for third reading forthwith.